Hey, so in this video, I am giving you a walk around of how I draw my portraits these days. And I spent the last month finishing the book by Andrew Loomis and also learned about the Riley's method. And in this video, I am kind of using a version of the sightseeing method in which you have a live model in front of you and you use the drawing tool to measure the proportions. And at this point, I'm pretty sure that it's not really the method that you're using, but how trained your eye is. And now, obviously, this is not painting, so it's still easier, I would say, to make sure that you can notice the shapes and the change in values. And one of the major mistakes that I made before, after trying out these new methods, was that I never really fixed the marks when they needed to be fixed. So if I had this block in and I knew that, okay, the eye shape is kind of odd, but I can fix it later, that's a bad move. Because everything in a portrait, it kind of works in reference to each other. So if you take these two lines and you also know that, okay, the shape, it's kind of wrong. Maybe it's the overall shape, or maybe it's the angle of the line, but for some reason you choose to fix it later. That's just kind of a building block to screwing up the whole portrait because everything, it again, it works in reference to each other. So that's why you should always make sure that the building block to whatever structure you're putting down your values on, it's accurate to the best of your ability. And if you don't do that, you're just kind of setting yourself up for spending more time on a piece that would have taken less time. And the theory about relations of proportions and value shapes, it just doesn't apply to the blocking stage. It also applies to the form pass. It also applies to the other stages in the process. That's why I feel like if you train your eye just to see the relation between the shapes of values, obviously, again, it's complicated in painting, but still, if you're just drawing, then you can obviously train your eyes to see the relations. And I did talk about it in my last video about value relativity, and it kind of ties into like how observant you are with the shapes of values. And the process that I talked about, like the whole comparison, it can be applied to different stages of the drawing. So if the blocking looks like this, then you can totally ignore the details and just focus on these parts that define the face and the features of the person that you're drawing. And that's why there are so many artists using the three-fourth view in which there is a Rembrandt triangle, which is like an illuminated triangle in the shadow side of the face. And it's also kind of useful because it makes up for an interesting portrait because the shape language, it's interesting to look at instead of a flat portrait, which is lit by, a lighting from the front. And another change that I've made to my process is that I move from generic shapes to specific shapes that are kind of similar to the ones that I'm seeing in the reference photos pretty earlier in the blocking. And I don't really jump too soon into the values like I used to before until I see the resemblance in my drawing compared to the reference photo. And it's again kind of a derivative of what I was talking about before, like the comparative analysis. Okay, this shape is larger or this line is more inclined than it should be. And you just take that concept and you apply it into the shape language. So it's kind of like applying the same concept into the different segments of the process of the drawing. So even when I reach this stage of the drawing, I'm kind of differentiating between the shadow shapes and the light shapes and comparing between, okay, this value shape is larger in the reference photo and smaller in my drawing. And another change that I incorporated was after like looking at the academic drawings and the book by Charles Bark. And I've seen so many artists, they're not really even using anywhere above 6B. They're just even, I've seen some artists use 4B and achieve incredible results because just they're so patient with their work. And it's kind of like a slow process because you have to really dig in between the tooth of the paper with like the sharpest pencil, or if you have a mechanical pencil, that works too. And in the darker areas, you can just use charcoal powder or a charcoal pencil because I've seen so many paper, they just cannot withhold the abuse that you kind of have to do to remove the graphite or the charcoal off the paper to show off the highlights. And I feel like removing graphite off the paper, it's so much more difficult than removing the charcoal because with graphite you have to apply force to make sure that the value is really dark, and with the charcoal it just gets dark and it's not a problem. You can apply little to no pressure and just brush over the area that you want to be darkened. And if you use a kneadable eraser, then you can just like take it off. And I found out that the most difficult parts that you have to deal with when you're going for the realism, especially if you want like really high contrast in your drawings, it's just like the highlighted area in the darkest darks. And if you really want to save time, then you have to kind of use charcoal. Like there's just no way around it because again, graphite takes so much longer to darken and charcoal is just like ready to go. And I feel like it's kind of worth a shot to give it a try. Just like try charcoal. Obviously, you have to like learn a couple of things about it. Like you cannot put graphite over charcoal and the amount of pressure that you have to put on. Even if you're using a pencil and how to blend it, like there's a lot of things. But again, I feel like it's worth a shot because even if it takes you a couple of months to get around it, you can still save a lot of time in the long term. And that's also why I feel like we should not hesitate to try different mediums because you get to take away things that you like from it and also different processes because you don't know what you can incorporate into your own workflow. And it's just fun to try it, and also you never know what ends up saving you time. I never really noticed it until I started actually making studies in charcoal. Like I can almost achieve the same amount of details in charcoal as I do in graphite, and at the end of the day it was just about like controlling the mess that charcoal makes. Anyways, this is the final drawing and I hope that you guys like this video, and I will see you in the next one.